this edition of Defense News Weekly, we go one-on-one with Lockheed Martin CEO Marillyn Hewson, see F-35s fly from a carrier, and discuss the future of the Coast Guard with in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis. This is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. President Trump's announced plan for steel and aluminum tariffs could have an outsized effect on defense companies. Critics of the tariffs include congressional Republicans, and the proposed import tax has also garnered near unanimous disapproval from other nations. While major companies say they don't yet know what the impact might be, advocacy groups like the Aerospace Industries Association say the tariffs could provoke retaliation. The Navy's Expeditionary Strike Group 7, based around the amphibious assault ship USS Wasp, is currently deployed in the Pacific, marking the first time F-35s have been deployed with an afloat Marine unit.
For the next few months, we'll be operating at sea with the Wasp Amphibious Readiness Group, and attached are destroyers, USS Dewey being one of them. We're also adding F-35Bs. Together, we're called an upgunned ESG, where we bring extra capability to the warfighting element of what we're doing here in theater. When Dewey's at sea, they bring their main battery, the 300-plus sailors that are on this ship. This is our #1 advantage.
What we bring to the fight is an armament that can protect Marines going ashore in a moment's notice. The USS Dewey brings the speed and agility, flexibility to the ESG. We have the capability of conducting strike missions in support of moving Marines to the beach. We have the Aegis weapon system, great opportunity to provide surveillance and detection for our Marine brothers, along with our MH-60 Romeo helicopter that's on board. We have 2 of those as well to assist us in providing that surface surveillance, protection.
The ability to use this gun behind me and engage targets both at sea and ashore, the ability to hunt and find submarines. These are capabilities that aren't normally part of an amphibious readiness group, but they are now. We'll be able to strike targets inland, we'll be able to find submarines, we'll be able to defend the force much more vibrantly. And when you put F-35Bs on top of that, you can see that we're going to be a much more capable force with significantly more options. And that's what we're bringing to the table.
Lockheed Martin hosted their annual Media Day this week, and one of the big topics was stealth problems with the company's marquee product, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. In fact, according to Lockheed's program head, stealth problems account for half of the airplane's manufacturing problems. One example that was highlighted was the need to make sure each panel of the aircraft is made to exacting specifications. And with the aircraft's massive supply chain, that can be a problem. All of this comes as negotiations are ongoing for the next lot of aircraft, with the U.S. government pushing for the lowest price possible, something that, according to the government, is proving difficult. During Lockheed's Media Day, CEO Marillyn Hewson addressed reporters on the state of the company and talked about how they've had to expand their supply chain around their customers.
In nation after nation, elected leaders and policymakers are putting a premium on domestic capacity building, job creation, and economic growth. These changing customer dynamics mean that we at Lockheed Martin must find ways to serve as a catalyst for economic growth and national aspirations.
After her speech, Hewson sat down for an interview with Defense News executive editor Jill Itoro and talked about everything from the cost debate over the F-35 to her relationship with the White House and government as a whole.
Marillyn, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
It's great to be here.
So I wanted to start off, we heard from the F-35 Program Executive Office, and they had some critiques about the program and brought up quality escapes and defects with the program. Can you talk to me a bit about what's happening to drive those out as much as possible?
Well, you know, on the F-35 program, we've continued to progress. We're now almost through all of the development, the first development phase, and now in ramping up production and sustainment of the aircraft. And as we look at the fact that we've got almost 280 jets already deployed in 15 different bases, it's maturing rapidly. We are very much focused on driving the cost down and on continuing to improve quality. In fact, in the last 5 years, the direct cost has come down like 75%. And on things like scrap, rework, and repair, the time that we involved on the production line to manage quality issues that happen in inline production, that has improved as well, and we're getting close to being at a level that's in line with other programs at this phase in their process.
Okay, I know the last issue involved kind of the primer protective layer. Has there been any issues since then? Or no?
Well, you know, as you're building a complex aircraft, you periodically will have things that might happen on the production line that you have to fix, but we don't have anything that's, you know, very significant that affects the entire fleet or anything of that nature.
You mentioned, of course, driving costs down, and I know you have mentioned before the goal of $80 million per plane by 2020. This was brought up before, but I'd like to get your response. The Air Force has pushed the schedule a little bit. How might that affect the ability to really get those costs down to where you plan to be by that time frame?
Well, clearly, you know, as I mentioned to you on the F-35A, which is the conventional version, and we have 3 versions, so each one, the others are a little bit more expensive because they require a different engine or they require more structure for the Navy variant, et cetera. But generally, we use the F-35A as the way of describing how we're bringing the cost down. So today, our last slide, it was at $94.3 million, and we're driving to get to an $80 million per aircraft by 2020. So I think that's very good drive. It'll be at a cost that's at or below what a 4th generation aircraft would cost, with much more capability. In terms of getting there, it's around the ramp up of production as well as the cost reductions that we're making in terms of the manufacturing producibility, of getting back with our supply chain and coming up with ways of reducing the manufacturing cost or taking cost out in the materials and things of that nature. So certainly the ramp up of production is very critical to driving to get to that price. We're encouraged by the fact that many of our international customers are supporting with their own funds a block buy, and Lockheed Martin has actually leaned forward and put a large amount of money toward us getting out to our suppliers on a block buy for lots 12 through 14. That again helps drive down the cost because they have that volume and they can invest in their facilities and reduce cost. So to the point is that yes, volume makes a difference in how we get to that unit cost, but we're doing a range of things to continue to drive the cost down, and we're still committed to driving to the $80 million price in collaboration with our customer and with our industry partners.
You and I have spoken before about the relationship with the Trump administration and with President Trump himself. I know that he did away with the manufacturing forum that was put in place that included yourself as well as a lot of other business leaders. Has there been a loss in terms of communication, or no? Do you still feel like there's a good outlet in terms of discussing some of the issues and top priorities with the president as well as the administration at large?
Well, there's a very strong relationship in the ability to talk about the issues that are important to the country. I mean, we were engaged in a large way on tax reform and working through that process, looking at what it would bring in terms of making us more globally competitive around the world. We've been engaged on reducing regulations. We've been engaged on workforce development, which is more than just STEM college careers, but things in internships and apprenticeships and the ways that we can reskill our existing workforce to deal with the technology transformation that's going on and all of the digital acceleration. So that engagement is very strong. I'm involved with trade associations such as the Aerospace Industries Association, as well as a Business Roundtable, Business Council. Those organizations have a good line of communication with the administration and with the president on the things that we can collectively do to focus on job creation and economic growth. So that's viable and growing and an important relationship. It's important in every administration for us that we have a dialogue with the administration and with Congress to work on things that we can partner on economic growth.
Executives are put in an interesting position in terms of that manufacturing council. Some chose to step down because of some comments that were made by President Trump. You opted to stick with it. He ended up dissolving it. But talk to me a bit about that decision. Why did you feel it was important to stay on board?
Well, as you recall, the issue was around the incidents that happened in Charlottesville and some of the dialogue around that versus the manufacturing council. I saw them as two distinct things, and I was very clear with the rationale of why I stayed on the council. We need to have a voice. We need to have a seat at the table and talking through how we, as a large manufacturer, one of the largest manufacturers in the country, how we can improve that environment and increase manufacturing and job creation. So that's one place that I wanted to have a seat at the table and be involved in. The matters of what happened in Charlottesville were separate, and and that is how I talked to my employees about it. What that was unacceptable and inappropriate, but they are two different things. So that's the reason I stayed on the council.
And now the council's gone, and you mentioned there's alternatives. Do you hope something like that will again reemerge or be created to allow for that official seat at the table for these sorts of things?
Well, we always look for opportunities where we have a voice, and I think those will continue. For example, as I talk about workforce development, we have a good dialogue with leadership in the administration on things that we can do together on workforce development, and I've been engaged with members of the administration on that front. Similarly, as we look at infrastructure and where there's opportunities there, as we want to sell our products internationally, we need the U.S. government advocacy to help us with selling our products and national security and interoperability and national security support with our allies. So I don't feel like we're not having that dialogue. I don't feel like we don't have a voice. And if there are other opportunities like the National Space Council where we can be engaged with our colleagues in working together with the administration, we look forward to those opportunities.
So there was some reports recently, one article in particular that cited that it has been said that you are as powerful as a cabinet level secretary or more. Do you, first of all, what is your response to that perception in terms of your position as CEO of Lockheed Martin?
Well, first of all, if you look at Lockheed Martin, in my view, I have the honor and privilege of leading what is a national asset. I mean, what we do for this country, men and women in uniform, and the things that we do on advanced discovery that helps change people's lives, the things that we do to support innovation and growth and jobs, we're an important element of the economy. So I take that responsibility very seriously. I think it's critically important. I think the dialogue you were referencing is the size of our company. We're a $51 billion company. That's our sales. We're not the largest in the United States. We're among the top Fortune 100, and that's because of what we do, of some of the most important work for not only our citizens, but for citizens of our allies around the world. So, comparing that to a cabinet secretary, I think that's the wrong comparison. I mean, we are a global security company that's in aerospace and defense.
And then finally, to close it out, what is the appropriate relationship between an executive like yourself and the Defense Department, and what is the importance in that role?
Well, I think it's important as a leader for Lockheed Martin. We are, if you look at our sales, it's close to 70% is for the U.S. government. And so it's important that we have a voice not only with the Department of Defense, which is our largest customer, but with our intel agencies, with Homeland Security, with NASA, with Commerce Department and others, that as the leader of the corporation, that I have an opportunity to represent our company, just as I do with leaders around the world when I meet with ministers of defense or chiefs of air forces and things like that. It's important that communication is open and transparent so that we can be a trusted partner to these customers that we have.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jill.
You can view more coverage of Lockheed's Media Day at defensenews.com. And to keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also be sure to add us on Apple News and other platforms for the latest updates. And coming up, a look at the future of the Coast Guard from the outgoing Commandant.
Today's program is provided in part by Raytheon, proud partner of FifthDomain.com, the sister site of Defense News, dedicated to all things cyber. Learn more at FifthDomain.com.
Admiral Paul Zukunft is wrapping up his time as Commandant of the Coast Guard. And recently at the National Press Club, he gave his final State of the Coast Guard address. In his remarks, he talked about the accomplishments of the service in the face of 3 massive storms and the need for an increased budget for the Coast Guard.
For a service that punches above its weight class, it's high time we were budgeted accordingly. Because quite honestly, for many years, we have been budgeted in the lowest weight class, the flyweight class. And more recently, I directed my senior leaders to abandon the do or die, suicide, squeeze, bunched stance that we have taken when it comes to defending our budget.
After his speech, Admiral Zuckump sat down exclusively with Defense News to discuss his time in office and what's ahead for the Coast Guard.
Admiral, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jill, and thank you for helping us tell our story.
So you are approaching your exit as Commandant of the Coast Guard. Can you first tell me about how that feels? Is it emotional?
I don't think it will be. The first thing you have to do is reconnect with who you are and not what you are. And there's a big difference between the two. When I show up at work, good morning, Admiral, and when I go home, I don't get that. You know, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and that's who I am. And so the first thing I need to do is let go of what I am and reconnect with who I am.
The latest news that I would like to touch on first is the new request for proposals for the icebreaker. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? You gave a few comments. You mentioned that it's very important these are properly weaponized. What might these look like in terms of systems?
Yeah, so we're well on the road to start building these. We stood up an integrated program office with the Navy. The first tranche of funding came through a Department of Defense appropriation and $150 million to get this program off and running. We've got 5 vendors who are interested in building heavy icebreakers here in the United States. We'll award a bid. If it meets our requirements, we'll look at what is most affordable and can it meet schedule as well, so we can get the first icebreaker in the water by 2023.
Which is
23,
amazing.
right.
2023, correct?
Right.
Yeah. You and I have spoken before about how the Coast Guard is perceived and how folks don't always give the Coast Guard the credit, particularly as a military service. Has that improved? How much further do we need to go for the Coast Guard to get that proper perception from the public at large, but also from the military itself?
Yeah, well, I have a great rapport with the chairman, with the Joint Chiefs, other service chiefs. I sit in the tank on all the deliberations, whether it affects operations or whether it affects the force. I have a seat at the table. So really no issues there. I think the other 2 areas of concern is that 96% of my budget is non-defense discretionary funded. Only 4% of my budget is funded through defense discretionary. So if you lift budget caps, who are the other donors then? If you're going to lift a budget cap for defense discretionary spending, well, you're going to go after non-defense discretionary. So we have found ourselves being the donor as an armed service to the other armed services to the point where our operational expense account since 2013 has been underfunded $150 million. We're about $1 billion underfunded, and we continue to be funded in our annualized operating and maintenance account below the Budget Control Act floor. We're looking at 18 and 19, finally getting our head above water, but we've been swimming underwater in the BCA Act ever since its an enactment because of this non-defense discretionary. The public, most coastal communities know who we are. As you move into the nation's heartland, you know, there are a number that don't know we're a military service. So there's always an identity crisis of sort. You know, who are those guys anyway?
You were the first among the Joint Chiefs to come out in support of the transgender community. What, when basically there was questions on whether they should be allowed in the military, what inspired you to do that?
Know your people. You know, 2 weeks before that, actually it was less than that. There was a message that went out, and one member, high performing member of our Coast Guard who is transgender, family has disowned this individual. This person no longer exists in his family's eyes. This person's family is this family of blue suits, the United States Coast Guard. Families turn their back on this individual, and am I going to do the same thing to this high-performing who came clean? When a policy is, we embrace you in this lifestyle, you can serve, and in your service of choice, I'm not going to break faith with those individuals. And these are small numbers.
Yeah.
17.
Right. But you know that.
Right.
I bet there's many that don't.
Yeah.
So I give you credit for that. Exiting words as you move on, what do you hope for the Coast Guard in the years ahead that will stay as a priority and perhaps that they might see change in future years?
Yeah, Jill, I think this is my 8th command I've had in the Coast Guard. When I left command of ship He said, you have the watch, and you walk away. The last ship I commanded, I went back for some event 6 months later, and most of the crew had changed out. And they had asked me if I ever served on a ship of that class. And it was all I could do to say, I was the captain of the ship 6 months ago. So you need to realize, this is not about you. There are many capable people that will take the service to the next level. I am adamant that anyone in these positions cannot be enamored with a legacy. If you try to leave a legacy, and maybe it's the right thing for the service, but most people will jump off the legacy train as soon as there's a new engineer. And quite honestly, this locomotive is going to run whether I show up for work one day or not to the next. It really is the men and women at the deck plate that run it. But I am very confident that my successor will take this, as every commandant going back to the very first, each one of them has taken the service to another level.
Well, thank you so much for sitting with us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jill.
And coming up, we talk to the inspiration for the CBS show Scorpion and sit down with a pioneering Navy Master Chief. On this week's Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her tips on how to balance your cash needs with wanting to save for your nest egg.
To keep cash on hand or to invest? That is the question for a lot of people trying to save toward retirement. It can also seem like a conflict of interest. Having cash for an emergency is vital. On the other hand, saving well for retirement means you should invest some cash in the market. But it doesn't mean you can't do both. Our research here at Navy Federal tells us that a good number of people don't really know how much to keep in emergency savings. A good rule of thumb is to put at least 3 to 6 months of pay in a savings account and reserve that for emergencies only. After you've reached that goal, you can start working your way towards investing. You should be already doing this in a TSP or 401k. If so, keep it up. And to give your nest egg a boost, you can start investing with as little as $25 a month in a brokerage account. Once you choose your stocks, over time you'll begin to see the effects of compounded returns as you build your balance. And you're also building interest in your emergency fund, keeping cash on hand at the same time as you're investing towards your future. Now you're saving and investing like a pro.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. March is Women's History Month, and Master Chief April Beldo made plenty of history during her 34 years of service in the Navy. She retired in January and was the first African-American woman to serve as Command Master Chief of an aircraft carrier and of the Navy's Recruit Training Command. Defense News' Dustin Diaz served with Beldo and spoke to her recently about her Navy career.
I always woke up every morning knowing that it could have been anybody else, but it was me. I was selected for Chief Petty Officer in 1995 when I was on board the USS Abraham Lincoln. And that selection process and the commanding officer waking you up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to let you know that you have now been selected to be a part of a fraternity, for me, was one of the most remarkable times in my career. And then to be able to be selected to Senior Chief and Master Chief and continue on my career, not everybody will get that opportunity. So those of us who have been selected and chosen to do certain jobs, for me, it was just a privilege. There have been a lot of shoulders, for example, that I have been able to stand on because they went before me, and the opportunities that I have been given over the time that I did serve in the Navy were only because of the works that they did before me. We have a responsibility to uphold the standard to the fullest extent as a Chief Petty Officer. Being able to represent all people, all sailors, and show them what right looks like, it was a humbling opportunity for me over my career. To know that you had an impact on somebody's life, and it might just be 1 or 2 people, but if you did right by them and they ended up doing good by the Navy, then it was all worth it.
Walter O'Brien is a cyber expert and the eccentric genius behind the CBS primetime drama Scorpion. But it's a real-life vulnerability that O'Brien is focused on solving for America. In the 20th century, brute force helped America win world wars and other major conflicts. But O'Brien says the next world war will be a cyber war, and in his mind, America is not prepared.
It's not how many bodies can you throw at the problem, because you just need 12 of the right people in a room to shut down your infrastructure, your gas lines, your sewers, your high-speed train system doing grade crossings, hitting cars, etc. Shut down your traffic routing systems. So it's not number of people. Too many cooks in the kitchen if you're paying folks at a lower rate to have, tens of thousands of cyber folks who are not coordinating with each other versus a smaller group that are well coordinated. And it has nothing to do with bending metal. It has to do with being good at math. The last report I saw is we're 47th in the world in terms of math. So yes, we have a major vulnerability there because we're still stuck in the last century.
That's all we have time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.